December 22, 1941. 24,000 feet above the South China Sea, west of Luzon, Philippines. The cockpit of the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk rattled as if it were being shaken apart by invisible hands. Cold air leaked through the seams of the canopy, carrying the sharp smell of oil and cordite. Below, the ocean stretched out in dull steel gray, calm and indifferent. Above, the sun burned white, high and unforgiving. First Lieutenant Kenneth "Ken" Taylor gripped the control stick with gloved hands that had not fully stopped shaking since dawn. He had been airborne for less than 10 minutes. Taylor's Warhawk climbed slowly, its Allison engine straining as it chewed through thin air. The P-40 was never graceful at altitude. Everyone knew that. It climbed poorly, turned worse, and bled speed like a wounded animal if handled wrong. Against Japanese fighters, especially the nimble Mitsubishi Is-6M0, it was considered inferior in almost every way that mattered in a dogfight. And now Taylor was alone. His squadron had scattered moments earlier, broken up by radio confusion and a sudden burst of enemy contacts. He'd pushed north, chasing what he thought were stragglers. Instead, he had flown straight into the heart of something far worse. The first glint caught his eye at the edge of the canopy. Then another. Then dozens. Taylor's stomach tightened as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were telling him. The sky ahead wasn't empty. It was alive. Tiny black specks fanned out across the blue, growing larger by the second, sunlight flashing off wings and canopies. Jesus Christ, he muttered into his oxygen mask. They weren't bombers. They were fighters. 64 of them. A full Japanese fighter formation, spread high and wide, descending toward him like a closing net. Zeros and Ki-43 Oscars, their silhouettes unmistakable now, wings rocking as pilots jockeyed for position. From above and behind. From both sides. From his blind spots. Taylor's radio crackled with static. No voices. No warnings. No help. The Japanese pilots saw him at the same moment he fully understood what was happening. A lone American fighter, isolated, climbing slowly, silhouetted against the sun. An easy kill. Inside several cockpits, there were grins. Some pilots laughed outright. The P-40 was already a known quantity by late 1941. Heavy. Stiff. Unable to turn with a zero. Its reputation had spread fast through Japanese air units operating over China and Southeast Asia. They had swarmed aircraft like this before. They expected this one to die just as easily. Taylor pushed the throttle forward anyway, the engine roaring in protest. The Warhawk shuddered as if insulted by the demand. His airspeed needle crept up, but not fast enough. Not nearly fast enough. He could turn left. He could try to climb. He could attempt to run. Every instinct screamed at him to maneuver, to fight. But training, hard, bitter training, cut through the panic. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them. Use what the airplane gives you. The first tracers cut through the air just ahead of his nose, glowing lines ripping past faster than thought. A zero flashed across his right wingtip, close enough that Taylor could see the pilot's helmet. They were already firing. The Japanese formation split with terrifying precision. Fighters peeled off in pairs and threes, diving down to rake him from above, others sliding underneath to trap him if he tried to dive. It was a textbook aerial ambush, clean and merciless. Taylor's Warhawk jolted as rounds punched through fabric and metal. Warning lights flickered. The cockpit filled with the sharp tang of burned insulation. He was seconds from being torn apart. Time did something strange then. The roar of the engine faded to a distant hum. The chaos outside the canopy narrowed into sharp, precise motion. Taylor's breathing slowed. His hands stopped shaking. He saw it. A narrow gap. Not below. Not to the sides. Straight through them. The Japanese pilots expected him to brake. Expected him to try to turn, to dive away, to do anything predictable. They had spread out to encircle, not to block a straight line charge. Taylor shoved the control stick forward. The nose of the P-40 dropped violently. Gravity slammed him against his straps as the Warhawk tipped into a near-vertical dive. The engine howled as airspeed exploded upward. The aircraft that had been a lumbering target seconds earlier transformed into a falling iron spear. A Zero fired, tracers streaking past as Taylor plunged straight toward the densest part of the formation. The sky rushed up. Japanese pilots reacted too late. They pulled hard on their sticks, trying to follow, but their light fighters shuddered as speed built dangerously fast. The Zero was agile, but fragile. Push it too hard in a dive and it shook itself apart. The P-40 did not. Its heavy frame and reinforced wings were built for exactly this. The Warhawk screamed as it knifed through the center of the swarm, so fast that individual aircraft blurred together. Taylor felt impacts, maybe debris, maybe shockwaves, as fighters flashed past on every side. For a split second, he was surrounded entirely by enemy planes. Then he was gone. The airspeed needle buried itself. Wind hammered the canopy. The ocean rushed toward him, filling the windshield in a terrifying gray wall. Behind him, chaos erupted. Japanese pilots overshot their dives. Some pulled out too hard, blacking out. Others broke formation entirely, shocked by the sheer audacity of what they had just seen. A single American fighter had not tried to escape. It had charged straight through them. Taylor held the dive until his teeth rattled, then pulled back gently, easing the Warhawk out just above the wave tops. Spray flashed beneath his wings as he leveled off, racing low and fast over the sea. Only then did he glance at his mirrors. The sky behind him was empty. The ocean rushed past just feet beneath Taylor's wings, a gray blur streaked with whitecaps. The P-40 thundered forward, engine screaming at full power, every rivet vibrating as if the aircraft itself were breathing hard after a sprint for its life. Taylor didn't look back again. He didn't need to. If the Japanese fighters had followed him into that dive, they would have been right on top of him now. The fact that his mirrors showed nothing but empty sky told him everything he needed to know. They had broken off, or they had been forced to. He exhaled slowly, only now realizing how tightly he had been clenching his jaw. The Warhawk steadied as he trimmed it out, skimming the surface at nearly 360 miles per hour. At this altitude, at this speed, the P-40 was no longer prey. It was exactly what its designers intended, a blunt, fast, brutally strong machine that could run straight through danger instead of dancing around it. Behind him, far above, the Japanese formation struggled to reorganize. Zeros that had followed the initial dive pulled up in wide, cautious arcs, pilots fighting compressibility and violent airframe shudder. Their aircraft simply weren't built for sustained high-speed plunges. Control surfaces stiffened. Wings flexed alarmingly. The moment for a clean kill had vanished. Inside 1-0 cockpit, a flight leader scanned the empty air below in disbelief. The American should have been dead. The encounter replayed itself again and again in Taylor's mind as he tore across the water. The moment he had pushed the nose down. The instant the formation had parted, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Because none of them expected a P-40 to do what he had just done. That was the quiet advantage of the Warhawk, something that didn't show up on comparison charts or turning radius diagrams. It could dive faster, harder, and longer than anything the Japanese had. Its heavy construction, so often mocked, allowed it to survive punishment and abuse that would have shredded lighter fighters. Taylor had bet his life on that truth. And won. Only after several minutes did he ease the throttle back slightly, letting the engine cool as he hugged the sea. The Philippine coastline appeared faintly on the horizon, hazy and smoke-stained. Columns of black rose inland where airfields and supply depots burned under constant attack. The war, barely weeks old in the Pacific, already felt ancient. Taylor keyed his radio again. Any American aircraft in the area, this is Red 2. Come in. Static answered him. He was still alone. As adrenaline drained away, the damage began to make itself known. The P-40 vibrated unevenly now. The controls felt sluggish. A glance at the instrument panel showed fluctuating oil pressure. He reached down, touching the fuselage beside his leg, and felt cold air pouring through new holes torn by machine gun fire. He had survived, but just barely. The encounter had lasted less than a minute. It would reshape how he fought for the rest of the war. Back above, the Japanese pilots finally regrouped. Confusion rippled through the formation as they searched for a reason the attack had failed. The American fighter hadn't outturned them. It hadn't climbed away. It hadn't even tried to escape sideways. It had gone through them. The concept was unsettling. Japanese doctrine emphasized agility, turning combat, and close-in maneuvering. Against that philosophy, the P-40 was supposed to be helpless. Yet what they had witnessed contradicted everything they believed about aerial combat. The Warhawk had used speed and gravity like weapons. Taylor reached the coast and climbed slightly, keeping his speed high as he crossed friendly territory. Ground fire crackled faintly below, nervous, indiscriminate, but quickly ceased when his silhouette was recognized. He lined up for the airstrip with care, easing the battered fighter down onto the runway. The landing gear groaned. The tires shrieked. When the P-40 finally rolled to a stop, smoke curling from its cowl, Taylor sat motionless for a long moment, hands still on the stick. Only then did the weight of what had happened settle over him. Crew chiefs ran toward the aircraft, stopping short when they saw the damage. Holes stitched the wings. The fuselage was torn open in places. One mechanic whistled softly. How many of them were there? Someone asked. Taylor climbed out, boots hitting the tarmac hard. He looked back at the sky, then at the riddled Warhawk. Too many, he said simply. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the squadron. Pilots gathered around the P-40, tracing bullet holes with their fingers, listening as Taylor explained what he had done, not with bravado, but with quiet certainty. Don't turn with them. Don't try to match them. Use the dive. Use the speed. It was a lesson paid for in blood across the Pacific, but one that saved lives when it was followed. For the Japanese pilots who had watched that single P-40 vanish beneath them, the encounter left a different mark. The American fighter they had mocked was not harmless. In the right hands, it was dangerous in ways they hadn't anticipated. The sky over the Pacific had changed. The next morning, the airstrip buzzed with quiet intensity. Taylor's P-40 sat off to one side, patched hastily with riveted plates and fabric dopes that barely hid the violence it had endured. Mechanics worked around it in silence, their usual jokes replaced by focused efficiency. Every man there understood how close that aircraft, and its pilot, had come to not returning at all. Inside the briefing shack, the squadron gathered. Maps were spread across a wooden table scarred by years of use. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. Pilots leaned forward as Taylor stood at the front, helmet tucked under his arm, replaying the encounter in precise, unemotional detail. I never tried to fight them, he said. Not once. That alone drew murmurs. Taylor pointed to the chalkboard, sketching quick arcs and lines. 64 fighters represented by a loose ring. One P-40 at the center. They wanted me to turn. That's what they expected. The moment you try to outfly a zero in a circle, you're already dead. He drew a straight line through the formation, slashing across the diagram. So I didn't give them a fight. I gave them a problem. Heads nodded slowly. The idea wasn't new, not entirely. American doctrine had discussed Bumanzung tactics before the war, but theory was different from survival. What Taylor had done proved that the P-40 could force an engagement on its own terms, even when outnumbered beyond reason. Especially when outnumbered. The lesson spread fast. Within days, pilots across multiple units were repeating the same guidance: stay fast, stay disciplined, and never turn unless you absolutely had to. Dive attacks. High-speed passes. Vertical separation. Hit once, hit hard, and disappear. The P-40 stopped being treated like a flawed dogfighter and started being flown like a weapon. Meanwhile, on the other side of the lines, Japanese pilots were talking too. Debriefings grew tense. Reports described American fighters that refused to turn, that plunged straight down at terrifying speed, that could not be caught once they committed to a dive. Some pilots admitted, quietly, that chasing them was dangerous, sometimes fatal. The Zero's strengths had limits. And those limits were being exposed. Weeks later, Taylor found himself airborne again, climbing through broken cloud cover, scanning the sky with practiced patience. This time, he wasn't alone. Two wingmen held tight formation, their Warhawks glinting in the sun. The radio crackled. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Taylor spotted them instantly, a smaller group this time, but still dangerous. Zeros, confident, angling in for the familiar circling fight. He didn't hesitate. "Stick with me," he said calmly. "We dive." The three P-40s rolled in unison, noses dropping, engines roaring. Speed built instantly. Tracers flashed, wild, hurried, as Japanese pilots tried to adjust, but the moment was already gone. They struck fast, climbing back up only after distance and altitude were safely regained. This time, no one was surprised. The Warhawk had found its role. Across the Pacific, encounters like Taylor's became less one-sided. Losses still came, the war was unforgiving, but American pilots were no longer flying blind. They understood that survival depended not on bravery alone, but on refusing to fight the enemy's battle. For the Japanese pilots who had once laughed at the P-40, the skies grew less predictable. The American fighters were no longer easy prey. They were disciplined, fast, and increasingly lethal. And it had started with one decision. One moment when a lone pilot, staring down impossible odds, chose not to react the way everyone expected. Taylor would survive the war. Others would not. But his split-second solution, born from instinct, training, and trust in his aircraft, echoed far beyond that single dive over the South China Sea. It proved that in aerial combat, the aircraft mattered. But how you used it mattered more. By early 1942, the sky over the Pacific was no longer a place of certainty for anyone. American pilots still flew aircraft that, on paper, were inferior in turning combat. The P-40 was still heavy. Still stiff. Still unforgiving if mishandled. But what had changed was mindset. Encounters were no longer entered with the assumption that agility decided everything. Speed did. Discipline did. Refusal to play the enemy's game did. Taylor felt that shift every time he climbed into the cockpit. The fear was still there, it never truly left, but it was controlled now, boxed in by experience. He had looked into a situation that should have ended his life and discovered that survival sometimes meant doing the opposite of instinct. Not evading. Not dodging. But committing fully. Japanese pilots, for their part, began adjusting as well. Briefings included warnings about diving Americans, about aircraft that could not be followed straight down without risking catastrophic failure. The Zero was still deadly, still elegant in a turn, but now there was hesitation, a fraction of doubt where confidence once lived. That hesitation mattered. It meant missed shots. Broken formations. Pilots pulling up early instead of pressing an attack. In air combat, those tiny moments decided who lived and who fell into the sea. Taylor never forgot the sight of that sky filled with enemy fighters. He never forgot how close it had come. Years later, when the war was over and the Pacific skies were quiet again, the story of the lone P-40 would circulate as a lesson rather than a legend. Not because it was miraculous, but because it was practical. It demonstrated something brutally simple. Technology does not fight wars by itself. People do. The Warhawk didn't save Taylor because it was superior in every way. It saved him because he understood what it could do, and just as importantly, what it could not. He didn't ask it to turn like a Zero. He asked it to fall like a hammer. And it did. That day, 64 Japanese fighters learned something they would carry with them into every future engagement. The American they thought they had trapped did not panic. He thought. He chose. And in the blink of an eye, he was gone, leaving behind only empty sky, shattered expectations, and a new understanding of how dangerous a so-called inferior aircraft could be.